Shiny Pokemon, what are they? Why do they exist? Where do they come from? Why are there people out there like me who constantly encounter the same Pokemon over and over again for a very slim chance of that Pokemon being a slightly different color? Going for Torchic Alpha Sapphire. Come on, is it shiny? Is it shiny? And no, it's never shiny. Let's go to the beginning of shiny Pokemon with the release of Pokemon Gold and Silver. They were released on the Game Boy Color, which was the first time Pokemon was available in color, and thus the first time we could actually see shiny Pokemon. Combined with the updated sprites, the Generation 2 games make Pokemon look much better and actually like Pokemon. And the weird thing is, in Generation 2, shiny Pokemon weren't officially called shiny Pokemon just yet. That term wasn't officially used until the Generation 4 era of Pokemon, with this event, Milotic, using the word shiny in its Wonder card for the event, but according to Professor Elm in the Gold and Silver Pokedex book, shiny Pokemon were called specially colored Pokemon. That doesn't roll off the tongue nearly as easily as shiny Pokemon though. But if they weren't shiny to begin with, then why do they even sparkle? I mean, the Gen 2 games do support color, so anyone will be able to see that their Pokemon are a different color and thus are shiny, right? Well, technically, you could still play Pokemon Gold and Silver on an original Game Boy in black and white, unlike you can do with Pokemon Crystal, which makes it much harder to tell if a Pokemon is shiny or not, so they added the sparkle effect to make it more obvious. Then for future games, the sparkle just stuck. I find it amazing that the only reason shinies have their iconic sparkle is because of the original Game Boy's hardware limitations. The sparkle is a big reason why fans even call them shiny Pokemon in the first place too, because, well, this looks like a shine. The weirdest thing about shiny Pokemon though is how hidden they were, especially in the early days of Pokemon. There is the red Gyarados in the Lake of Rage, which is shiny, that you'll encounter in the story of Gold and Silver, but the explanation behind it being red is because of the radio tower waves that Team Rocket was using to send them out, making it angry. Do these radio waves cause Pokemon to be shiny? Was it just a coincidence that there was a shiny Gyarados in the Lake of Rage? Or maybe the Gyarados was just always angry, hence why the lake is even called Lake of Rage in the first place. I have no idea. The anime reason behind the Gyarados being red was because it was forced to evolve and didn't have time to change its scales from Magikarp's red scales to the traditional blue scales Gyarados have. But what about other shiny Pokemon? Are they forced to evolve too? I'm probably overanalyzing a small detail of Pokemon that doesn't really matter, which is a theme on the channel, but this red Gyarados is the easiest shiny Pokemon to get outside of any limited time event, because every copy of Gold, Silver, Crystal, and their remakes on the DS will have one in the Lake of Rage. Finding a shiny Pokemon is just about as rare as seeing me in a different shirt other than the same 4 shirts I usually wear in my videos, so that's where today's sponsor, Into the AM, comes into play. They sent me some of their clothes to try out, like this shirt that I'm wearing right now, and their clothing is comfortable, high quality, and features some cool designs like this Vivid Voyager tee on the one I'm wearing right now. Just in time for fall, they have some nice long sleeve shirts as well, which I really like. I'm a big fan of this color, and I'll probably be wearing this one a lot. Check out Into the AM in the description and use PaPaSea for 10% off your own order of premium made tees. They also have a deal for 3 basic tees for $52.95, which is a pretty good deal given the quality. Thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video, and now back to shiny hunting. While shiny Gyarados has remained red since its inception in Gold and Silver, there are a couple of other Pokemon that have actually had their shiny colors change throughout the years. The most famous example is Charizard, going from this purple color in Generation 2 to black in Generation 3 onward, but there are some other cool ones like Rapidash going from a purple flame to a more gray flame, or Spinarak going from purple to more of a duller green. Some of these can be due to the expanded color palette in Generation 3 in the Game Boy Advance to allow for more options, but this just adds to how weird shiny Pokemon were in Generation 2. The odds of getting a random wild shiny in Generation 2 is 1 in 8,192, the sacred number amongst full odds shiny hunters who prefer to shiny hunt with the hardest odds possible. There are various ways to lower these odds that we'll discuss later, and while I used to not understand full odds hunting, now I do. I'm not here to mock how people shiny hunt, although making shiny Pokemon memes on Twitter is fun, but at the end of the day, the best way to shiny hunt is however you want to shiny hunt. But something about going for a full odds 8192 shiny in Generations 2 through 5 is more impressive to me than just booting up Scarlet and Violet, making a ham and cucumber sandwich or whatever with no top bun, and then getting a shiny in about 20 minutes or so because of how low the odds are. Maybe this is just me too, but something about a 2D pixel sprite being shiny looks way better than this. I mean, I still like shiny hunting in the newer Pokemon games, especially Generation 6, but something about the shinies in the 2D sprite era makes them pop a bit more. There are other ways to lower your odds in the earlier Pokemon games, like in Generation 5 if you complete your Pokedex and get the Shiny Charm, or in Generations 4 and 5 if you use the Masuda method. This is the most famous type of method hunt, with a method hunt being anything that helps lower your odds. The way this works is you get 2 Pokemon you want to breed, with 1 Pokemon being from another part of the world. In this case, we have this Japanese implant I got off of the GTS years ago, as well as this American Ditto called an American copy of Pearl. This method has existed in every game since Generation 4, and if you have a parent Pokemon from different real-world regions, then your odds will be 5 in 8,192 in Generation 4. In Generation 5 onwards, this was lowered to 6 in 8192, but since the Shiny Charm naturally lowers odds anyway, it can make those odds 8 in 8192 in Generation 5 instead. Now this might be a little bit confusing, but there is a difference between a method of shiny hunting and just a way of shiny hunting. For example, the Masuda method is a method hunt because it lowers the odds directly, and the same goes for DexNav in Generation 4 because the increased chain lowers your odds. However, if you say soft reset for a starter Pokemon or just run around in the grass for a Rancid wild Pokemon, the odds of getting the shiny are still full odds of that game, so it isn't a method hunt, just a different way to shiny hunt. There are a couple of really cool method hunts though. Post Generation 5, the shiny odds were halved to be 1 in 4096 instead of 1 in 8192, effectively making shiny Pokemon 2 times more common. More methods were introduced, but I do plan on making videos in the future focusing on shiny hunting in specific games or generations, and all of the methods that exist in them, starting with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, because there are a lot of interesting ways to shiny hunt in that game, but of course, I need that shiny Torchic, and as you saw earlier, we're just not getting it apparently. So remember how I said that shiny hunting was introduced in Generation 2? Well, I lied. Sort of. You could technically get shiny Pokemon in the Generation 1 games, although they won't be a different color, and they won't have a star next to your name, and they won't sparkle when they appear. You might be wondering, what's the point then, and how could you even tell if a shiny Pokemon is shiny in Generation 1 then? This is due to a weird quirk in Pokemon with how shiny Pokemon are determined in Generation 2. In the modern Pokemon era, their stats are distributed between IVs and EVs, which stand for individual values and effort values respectively, with IVs being predetermined when a Pokemon is caught or hatched. Before Generation 3, these stats worked a bit differently and were known as DVs, or determinant values. There's many factors that go into determining a Pokemon's DVs, but if a Pokemon's speed, defense, and special DVs are all 10, and its attack DVs are either 2, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 14, or 15, then it will be shiny in Generation 2. This wasn't the best way to determine if a Pokemon was shiny or not, since it meant strange things like how a female Cyndaquil just can never be shiny in the Generation 2 games, or a Pokemon with perfect stats also can't be shiny either. One shiny hunt I'm doing on the side is for a shiny Cyndaquil in Generation 2. I should probably stop picking up so many shiny hunts before I get this Turtwig or this Torchic, but here I am. But the more I learn about shiny hunting, the more motivated I am to try different hunts in different games. Resetting for a Cyndaquil in Crystal is pretty easy too, since if you see it's a female, you can just reset right away since it can never be shiny. And each encounter is shorter than a Turtwig encounter in Platinum, which is a huge plus. But if we look at Generation 1, they also use DVs to determine Pokemon stats, so if you transfer over a Pokemon with a certain stats to a Generation 2 game from Generation 1, it could be shiny. This makes shiny hunting in Generation 1 a lot like reading a lottery ticket because you have to look at its stats after you catch it and calculate it, with the most common Generation 1 shiny hunts I've been seeing being for the shiny Mewtwo in the Cerulean Cave. My friend Nora developed an application for Generation 1 that adds a star next to their name when you encounter a Pokemon, so you don't have to catch every single Pokemon and look at their stats. I don't understand how it works, nor do I know how to use it, but if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link to her tweet explaining it in the description below. While this is a cool quirk to get a shiny Pokemon by transferring it over to another game, there is a similar but more devious shiny quirk in the Generation 3 games. From Generation 3 onward, a shiny Pokemon is calculated by this complex formula involving your trainer ID and a few other hidden values you can't normally see in your game. This is because we do not use DVs anymore, but rather IVs, fundamentally changing how every Pokemon works, and is a big reason why the Generation 2 games can't trade with Generation 3 games. This means you could technically have a perfect IV shiny Pokemon for battling, which is nice, but it also meant that you could hatch a Pokemon, it'll appear shiny, and then when you look at it in your party, it'll lose its shininess. This could also happen in reverse too, where a Pokemon can hatch and not be shiny, then appear shiny when it's in your party. So why does this even happen? It's because the egg is assigned the trainer ID and other values from the game where the egg was first received in, and then if the egg is traded over to a different game, it will be given the values of the new trainer. The values don't get updated until after the hatching animation for the Pokemon plays, which can cause this to happen. They didn't fix this issue until Generation 6, and while it was a very unlikely scenario to happen, I can only imagine how terrible it will feel to hatch a Pokemon, see that it's shiny, and look at it in your party and see that the game trolled you when it's not actually shiny. Another way shiny Pokemon can troll you in Generation 3, or more specifically in Fire Red and Leaf Green, is in the Trainer Tower. This trainer here in the Trainer Tower has a shiny Espeon. This is the first instance of an NPC who will always have a shiny Pokemon, and it was my first time ever seeing a shiny Pokemon in-game that wasn't the red Gyarados. Despite the countless hours I have poured in the Generation 3 games, I have still yet to find a full-on shiny one of my physical copies of the game. There are other instances though where you can encounter shiny Pokemon you can't catch, like this trainer's Espeon. I don't know if this is intentional, but they can be very frustrating, especially since they are uncatchable. The most notable of this is the Starly in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, or Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. After picking your starter Pokemon getting ambushed by a wild Starly, that Starly has a chance to be shiny. You can't catch it though because you don't have any Pokeballs yet, and while I've never encountered this personally, I can only imagine how frustrating it can be to be hunting for a shiny starter Pokemon in those games and then see a Starly that you can't catch instead. That's part of the reason why I'm going for a shiny Turtwig in Platinum as opposed to in Diamond and Pearl. In Platinum, you pick your starter in a different spot and don't get ambushed by a Starly. Instead, your first battle in Platinum is with Berry and Berry's starter Pokemon, and in Platinum, Berry's starter can't be shiny. Platinum is also a bit faster per reset, which adds up pretty quickly. There are a few other instances of this, like how in Pokemon Black and White, the Minccino Professor Juniper sends out in the introduction of the game can be shiny, or the Bidoof that Donner Lucas captures in the Catching Tour for Diamond and Pearl can be shiny as well. Generation 3 is worse with this and likes to tease you with shiny Pokemon though. First, the Zigzagoon or Poochyena that attacks Birch in the Hoenn games can be shiny. The Zigzagoon that Wally uses to catch Ralts can be shiny as well, and the Ralts itself can even be shiny, as well as rental Pokemon in the Battle Factory, and the Weedle in the catching tutorial of Fire Red and Leaf Green. There are a few other examples too of this in Generation 3 and in other Pokemon games, and I think they're just cruel. You would think that maybe this is just an oversight and they would make it so uncatchable Pokemon can't be shiny, especially with what they did starting in Generation 5. Generation 5 introduced the Shiny Lock, which is still around today and is quite controversial. What this means is some Pokemon, no matter how many times you encounter them, just can't ever be shiny. This includes Victini, Meloetta, and Keldeo, among others introduced in later generations. The main reason for this was to save these Pokemon shiny variations for event distributions later on, rather than letting people shiny hunt for them. This was strictly just to promote these events and takes away some of the magic behind shiny Pokemon. Shiny gift Pokemon just have an odds of 1 in 1 so they can always be shiny, but not every Pokemon abides by those odds with the traditional 4096 odds or 8192 odds. I'm not talking about method hunts, but there are some other weird quirks with shiny Pokemon too, like Unknown. While Unknown is a pretty useless Pokemon, I can't lie. Getting a full alphabet of shiny Unknown and Crystal would be a pretty cool shiny goal to accomplish. That is, if it were even possible. In Generation 2, the Generation Unknown was first introduced in, the only Unknown that can be shiny are the I and the V. This was because of how the values were determined for a Pokemon's DVs also being tied with which letter Unknown generated, which on top of that calculated how they were shiny or not. This was changed in Generation 3 onward, so you could get a shiny Unknown in every letter now. I'm glad they changed how shiny Pokemon are generated now, because the way they were in Generation 2 makes it for so many weird instances like this one with Unknown. Another quick shiny quirk with Generation 2 is how two shiny Pokemon just can't breed together. It's because the game doesn't want Pokemon that are too closely related to breed, and the way the game sees that is if the Pokemon has two similar stats, and since shiny Pokemon need to have specific stats, the game sees all shiny Pokemon as being related. But let's say you had one shiny Pokemon in the Daycare Generation 2 with a non-shiny Pokemon. The egg generated by these Pokemon will have a whopping 1 in 64 chance of being shiny due to how the breeding mechanics in Generation 2 works with passing down DVs. Those are some fantastic odds and something I really want to try after I get my shiny Cyndaquil. Remember earlier how we talked about full odd shiny hunting versus method shiny hunting, and how full odd shiny hunting just goes by the full odds and method hunting lowers those odds by however they can? What if there was something that was technically full odds, but wasn't 8192 or 4096, but you still didn't do anything to lower those shiny odds yourself? This is Jirachi. You probably knew that, but what you didn't know is I got this Jirachi from the Pokemon Coliseum bonus disc. You can get one Jirachi per save file on your copy of Ruby or Sapphire, and it's really neat, and the bonus disc itself is very expensive, even though all it really does is give you this Jirachi. You can watch some Pokemon movie trailers that are coming soon too, I guess. Can't wait for these to release. Since this was in the era before shiny locks, this gift Jirachi can also be shiny. It's a bit of a pain to get though. My friend Neo has been going for one for months and is a few thousand encounters in with no shiny Jirachi yet. The quirky thing about this though is that Jirachi's shiny odds from the bonus disc aren't the traditional 1 in 8192 odds as it should be in Ruby and Sapphire. The odds of getting a shiny Wishmaker Jirachi is roughly 1 in 7,281, and it wasn't even intended for this Jirachi to be shiny at all. The way this works is the Coliseum bonus disc has a chance of generating between 65,376 different Jirachi combinations based on its stats or nature. It is then only possible for 9 of those Jirachis to appear as shiny, hence the weird odds. It still takes about 10 minutes per encounter for Jirachi though in Ruby and Sapphire, since you basically need to reset your entire game every time, unless you do some slightly cheaty methods to make that encounter rate faster, but that's really not part of this video. But let's say you did decide to go for a shiny starter in Ruby and Sapphire, like I did with this shiny Trico in my copy of Ruby version. Pretty cool, right? What if I told you that I got this shiny Trico in under an hour and it wasn't because of my insane shiny luck? This was because of RNG manipulation. Many events in Pokemon are determined by RNG or random number generation, and if we manipulate the game to generate these numbers for say like determining if a Pokemon is shiny or not, we can take advantage of that and get shiny Pokemon way quicker. The way this works is that shiny Pokemon in Generation 3 are determined by this formula involving your trainer ID and secret ID. If we use some external programs, we can use that to help us manipulate the game to give us a very specific trainer ID and secret ID, then calculate which frame of the game we have to press the A button in to pick our starter to always make it shiny. This is pretty tricky to pull off and I don't fully understand it, but it works better if your game's battery has ran dry, and if you do it right and press A at the right frame, your starter will always be shiny. It is technically full odds still, I guess, but with an asterisk around it because we manipulated the game. It is a little tricky to set up, and I will leave a link in the description to the method that I used to get this shiny Trico, which I did use on an actual copy of the game and an actual DS console. While I think the mechanics behind RNG manipulating shiny Pokemon is pretty cool, it just doesn't feel the same to me as randomly encountering a shiny Pokemon in the wild. I think that's a big reason why I like shiny hunting so much. I didn't always understand full odds hunting or shiny hunting in general, but being able to just sit down and do a simple task in a video game while watching TV or something is pretty relaxing, especially with the ever so slight chance of getting a shiny Pokemon. I am still nearly 6 months into this stupid Turtwig hunt, so I can eventually make a video on shiny hunting Generation 4, but first I'd like to complete some more Generation 4 hunts, and I of course need a starter Pokemon for that, so Turtwig, what are you waiting for? I want to even try shiny hunting on multiple consoles at the same time more, something that's been pretty popular lately, although unfortunately many of these older Pokemon games and even the consoles are pretty expensive. Like, why is an English copy of Platinum $200? I just think making a video where I beat a game using only shiny Pokemon and do a few different shiny hunting methods throughout and talk about it would be pretty cool, although it would take a really long time, especially in the older Pokemon games. I am really heavily considering going all out for Turtwig and buying more copies of Platinum so I can just reset on like 6 consoles at once and stream it on my Twitch, link in the description by the way. I know playing on 6 consoles at once will hurt my hands tremendously, but I just want this stupid shiny turtle already. That's a big reason why I'm focusing more on shiny in Alpha Sapphire now than Platinum version. It does make me wonder though, how you see so many shiny only videos cranked out by people who claim they don't alter the shiny odds in any other way and claim to play on official hardware, but then have a final game time that's beaten in the same amount of time it would take to beat a game without spending hours shiny hunting every Pokemon. Weird. Now for the lightning round, shiny Pokemon in the non-main series games. My favorite is the Golden Magikarp and Magikarp Jump. I don't know why this game is still around because who plays Magikarp Jump, but if you do play it, you could get a Golden Magikarp. You can also find shinies Pokemon Rumble 2, an underrated spin-off game in my opinion, and I like seeing these toy Pokemon shine. In Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, some shiny Pokemon even look different than they do in the Generation 3 core series games, but if you transfer them over from the GameCube to the Game Boy Advance, they look like normal shinies. This is the only time where you can transfer over a shiny Pokemon from a spin-off into the main series game, unless you count Pokemon Go. I guess it's a spin-off since you can transfer Go shinies into the Switch games, but the shiny odds of Pokemon Go are way too common, especially with the boosted odds from community days where you get like 10 shinies in a couple hours. At the end of the day, having easier ways to get shiny Pokemon isn't a bad thing, since it makes it so people with less time can still shiny hunt and find as many shinies as they want. Whether it's in Pokemon Go or with sandwiches in Scarlet and Violet, well, if you want to make shining as hard as possible on you as you can, you could say, try to go for a shiny Seedot in Emerald version where it's a 1% encounter rate, has 8192 odds, and phase like 50,000 times on Zigzagoons and Poochyenas until you finally get the 1% shiny Seedot. And funny story, before I started making this video, there was a live stream, which I'll link in the description, that was trying to get every single shiny Pokemon in Emerald version, including this shiny Seedot, and they spent like a year trying to get it, but since starting making this video and now, they got the shiny Seedot, so that's just fantastic. I also want to give a brief shout out to community ran shiny hunting events. The one that I've heard of the most is Safari Week, which was ran by my friend Quick Panic. I've never participated in one yet, but the way it works is a bunch of shiny hunters come together on Twitch or YouTube or just elsewhere, and they shiny hunt in the Safari Zone until they find a shiny Pokemon or as many shiny Pokemon as they want. The cool thing, or maybe not cool thing about shiny hunting in the Safari Zone is that the Pokemon in the Safari Zone have a chance to run away. I can only imagine the pain and suffering it takes to see a shiny Pokemon run away, especially since most Safari Zones are full odds 8192, and hopefully when I finally participate in one of these events, I don't have to feel that pain. Anyway, I really want to get more into shiny hunting and making more shiny content, so be sure to follow me on Twitch, link in the description, where I do plan on streaming some of my future shiny hunts. I've made a few other shiny hunting videos in the past though, like this video about a year ago where I did a shiny badge quest on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but every shiny hunt was with a different friend of mine who shiny hunts, also on different games. So even though I was playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I did some hunts on Omega Ruby, some hunts on Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, and it was a lot of fun and one of my favorite videos I've ever made, and the video that really got me into the shiny hunting community. And with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see y'all next time, and bye-bye.